A few weeks ago, I taught my son how to ride his bike. I took him to the playground at his elementary school because it was sort of the flattest, most protected space I could think to use. And as soon as we got started, I had two revelations. The first one was that his tires were flat. It made it pretty hard to learn how to ride a bike. Once I fixed that, things went much more smoothly. The second realization I had was that the skills he was learning on the playground on a Saturday with me were exactly the same skills that I hoped he was learning in his classroom during the school week. Courage, optimism, persistence, these character strengths or social-emotional skills or non-cognitive traits, whatever you want to call them, which are so critical for success, not just in school, but in life. And once he drew on these skills and his tires were properly inflated, he was cruising and did great. I worry, though, that schools aren't focusing on these character strengths because there's so much attention paid to end-of-year test scores. And I'm someone personally who thinks end-of-year test scores matter. I don't think they're the only thing that matters. I think they're the floor of what we need to expect from schools, and we're mistaking that floor for the whole house. And in fact, by focusing so excessively and exclusively on end-of-year test scores, science is suggesting to us that we are missing half of what kids need to become fully engaged, successful, flourishing adults. We're only seeing half the picture of what education needs to do. We're sending them out into the world with half the air let out of their tires. So I think schools need to do both. Schools need to teach content knowledge that's measured on end-of-year tests, and schools need to teach character strengths as well. And I know that schools can do it. Consider the case of two of the co-founders of the organization that I work for. It's called Character Lab, where I serve as the director of research. Dave Levin was the co-founder of the KIPP network of schools, about 100 schools around the country serving kids in some of the most under-resourced communities. And KIPP schools do an amazing job at getting kids to graduate high school and go to college at pretty astounding rates. And while many of the kids were going on to be successful in college, many were not. So Dave knew something was missing. Despite really good academic preparation, many of these kids were not persisting in college. Something from their education was missing. Dominic Randolph, another founder of our organization, comes from the other end of the socioeconomic spectrum. He's the head of the Riverdale School in New York City, serving some of the most affluent members of New York and, in fact, in the country. But he also felt something was missing. Even though Riverdale kids were going to the most selective colleges in the country and doing well there, Dominic was concerned that his students weren't learning how to leverage failure to learn, how to grow from mistakes, how to engage with each other, themselves, and the world in an open-minded, persistent, curious, empathetic way. Fragile thoroughbreds is a memorable phrase that Dominic uses to talk about his students. So Dominic and Dave figured out ways to insert character strengths into the very heart of what they were doing in their schools. And along with psychologist Angela Duckworth, they created the Character Lab to help all schools be able to do this better. And they're really right. Look, I'm trained as a researcher. I believe in peer-reviewed studies and standard deviations and p-values and studies and evidence. So I'm going to share some of that with you. Because science is telling us these things are really important. Grit is sustained persistence over something you're passionate about for a long amount of time. At West Point, they have the first 7 weeks is called Beast Barracks. And that's the process that they use to, as they say, turn civilians into soldiers. So it is a grueling 7-week process. And West Point has a way to think about the potential of each of their young people. It's called the whole cadet score, the whole candidate score. And it has lots of information, physical, stamina, things like that, SAT, GPA. And yet the whole candidate score does not predict who's going to be successful at this Beast Barracks week, while a simple couple of item survey measure of grit does. Think also about growth mindset. Carol Dweck at Stanford has pioneered the work of growth mindset, which is the belief that intelligence is malleable, that through hard work and challenging situations you can grow and become smarter, as opposed to having a fixed mindset, which is the belief that you sort of have a certain amount of intelligence and that's all you kind of have. And this is so important for so many kids in this generation, including sometimes I worry my own, who are told so often, you're so smart, you're so good at this, you're so perfect. They're not given a lot of opportunities to fail, and then they do very well through early life and maybe through high school, but when they get to college or they get to their first job and they confront a real challenge or they have a failure, it's not a time for growth, it's a brick wall. They don't have the skills to turn challenge into growth. They think they've been successful in the past because they are smart. If they're not successful now, they must not be smart enough. There's no way to use that to learn and grow. And she's shown this in a really elegant set of studies for young children, where she gives two groups of kids a puzzle. And she praises one group for being good at the puzzle. And she praises the other group for working hard at the puzzle. And then she gives both groups a much more challenging puzzle. The group that was praised for being good at the puzzle doesn't enjoy the challenge, gives up quickly, and has pretty limited success. Whereas the group that was praised for working hard at the puzzle enjoys the challenge, spends more time on it, and in the end is more successful with the puzzle. So these things really matter with how we approach important challenges and obstacles in life and can grow from them. But it doesn't just matter for kind of school-based outcomes. It can matter for our very physical health. The marshmallow test is one you might be familiar with. Walter Mischel put little marshmallow in front of very young children, preschool-age kids, and he said, you can have this marshmallow now, or if you wait until the grown-up comes back, you can have 2 marshmallows. And it turns out that decades later, the number of seconds that these kids could wait to delay gratification, the number of seconds that they could exert self-control and not eat that marshmallow, is correlated to a whole host of important lifetime outcomes. Not just grades in school and SAT, but body mass index when these 4-year-olds are in their 20s and 30s. So these things really matter. Now, one question the researcher in me asks next is, okay, they matter. Can we change them? Are they malleable? Are they malleable in a school context? Well, consider the Perry Preschool program. This is one of the most famous experiments in social science and educational research. The Perry Preschool program was a high-quality early education program, and a lot more people wanted to send their kids there than there was room, so they sort of randomly selected. One group of kids got the program, a similar group of kids didn't get the program, and then they followed them for years. In the first couple of years after the program, the kids who had exposure to Perry Preschool did better in school and things like grades and the like. But by about 3rd or 4th grade, that kind of washed out. But they followed these kids for decades. 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, there were significant differences between the kids who got the program and kids who didn't. And they didn't show up necessarily in grades or SAT scores, but they showed up in things like how much money they were making, they showed up in things like marital stability, and they showed up in things like criminal involvement. So these things do matter, and schools can teach them. I mean, why even have schools? We have schools so children can develop their own potential. We have schools so kids can become active citizens. We have schools so that kids can become sort of self-sustaining and active members of the economy. And we know that these things take critical thinking, we know that they take literacy, we know that they take math skills, but science is telling us they also take these character strengths, so we need to focus on them. And now I know teachers in the audience are going to believe this and probably already try to do this and also feel like their time is very precious and there's a lot of pressures and how can you possibly get this into the school day? Well, we are learning that there are ways to do this in relatively short bursts of activity that can make real differences. We have learned from Gabriel Oettingen, a psychologist at New York University, that there's a process called WOOP, which is a goal attainment strategy for kids. A WOOP, W-O-O-P. The W is a wish, the first O is an outcome, the next O is an obstacle, and the P is a plan. So if I'm a middle schooler and I WOOP, my wish might be, I want to get more of my homework done. And the outcome would be that would make me feel proud, it would make my parents feel happier, it would take pressure off me from my teacher, so I'd be happier at school. But I have an obstacle. My obstacle is that my sister is very annoying. And when I come home from school and plan to do my homework, she's on the phone and on television. If the television is loud and I can't get my work done, I get distracted. So then I can have a plan. I can do my homework in a quieter place, maybe in my mother's room. So then you take the obstacle and the plan and you make a simple if-then statement. If my sister is annoying me when I'm going to try to do my homework, then I will finish my homework in my parents' room. When a bunch of middle schoolers in another elegantly designed, sort of tightly controlled experiment were taught to whoop, the kids who whooped grew their GPA half a standard deviation compared to the kids who didn't whoop in that marking period. That's going from like a C+ to a B-, which in the world of educational research for a short intervention is really a profoundly big effect. So we know that schools can do this. We need to do more. Character Lab, where I work, is funding real research with real schools and real kids to try to develop more interventions to grow character strengths in K-12 settings. We're working with researchers like Gabrielle to make interventions that are out there in the world accessible and available to as many parents and teachers and schools as possible. You can see our webpage. We have a whole way to help you whoop with your kids. And we know that teachers have great ideas. So we are funding teachers who have exciting ideas to build character in their students. We're giving a $10,000 stipend, the budget to try your idea, and help to assess the impact that these ideas have. And we need to figure out how to do more of this, because if we continue to focus only on math and reading scores on end-of-year tests, we are only giving our children half of what they need to succeed. We are sending them out there with half the air let out of their tires. And they may make some progress, but it's going to be slow, it's going to be painful, and they are not likely to get where they may need or want to go. And where do we want them to go? If you're a parent, what do you want for your kids? If you're a teenager, what do you want for yourself? I know that I want my kids to be happy, compassionate, creative, fulfilled, and kind. I want them to find their own way in the world and not default to what other people think they should do. I bet you want that too. And we know that's going to take great literacy skills and math and critical thinking, absolutely. But it's also going to take self-control. It's going to take grit. It's going to take gratitude. It's probably going to take a pretty good sense of humor. It's going to take character, so we better make sure they get it. Thank you very much.